The phone buzzed against my desk at 3:17 in the morning. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end changed everything. Marcus Chen from Nexus Ventures. The Marcus Chen. Asking for Alex Rivera. Not asking for my brother David. Not asking for the company David claimed he built. Asking for me. My hands shook as I held the phone. 3 years of watching David take credit for my work. 3 years of standing in shadows while he basked in spotlights meant for me. 3 years of swallowing my rage while he told investors, reporters, anyone who would listen, that he was the genius behind our AI breakthrough. But Marcus Chen wasn't calling David, he was calling me. The office felt different when I walked in the next morning. The same sterile walls, the same fluorescent lights casting everything in that cold corporate glow. But something had shifted. The balance of power had started to tip, and David didn't even know it yet. He was in the conference room, pacing like he always did when he was nervous. Through the glass walls, I could see him gesturing wildly to someone on his phone. Probably another investor call. Another performance where he played the brilliant founder while I remained the invisible technical support. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The code stared back at me. Thousands of lines I had written, algorithms I had designed. Neural networks I had trained through countless sleepless nights while David attended networking events and startup conferences, collecting business cards and telling my story as his own. The AI that had made our company worth $50 million. The AI that venture capital firms were fighting to invest in. The AI that David claimed came from his vision, his leadership, his genius. My AI. Sarah from accounting walked past my desk. She smiled. That polite corporate smile that said she knew I existed, but had no idea what I actually did here. None of them did. David had crafted the narrative so carefully that even our own employees believed he was the technical mastermind. The bitter taste in my mouth was familiar now. I had been swallowing it for so long that it felt like part of me. But Marcus Chen had called me directly. My phone buzzed, a text from David. Team meeting in 10 minutes, big announcement. I closed my laptop and walked to the conference room. The rest of the engineering team was already there. Jake, our junior developer who looked at David like he hung the moon. Lisa, our data scientist who had joined 6 months ago and only knew David's version of our origin story. Tom, our lead engineer who had been here long enough to know the truth but had never said anything. David stood at the head of the table, his smile wide and confident. He wore that navy blazer he always put on for important calls, his presentation remote ready in his hand. I wanted you all to hear this first, David said, his voice carrying that practice enthusiasm that had fooled so many investors. I just got off a call with Goldman Sachs. They want to discuss a partnership that could be worth hundreds of millions. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Jake actually clapped. David basked in their admiration, feeding off their energy like he always did. They specifically mentioned our breakthrough in neural network optimization. David continued, clicking to his first slide. The revolutionary approach that's put us ahead of every competitor in the market. My breakthrough, my approach, my sleepless nights debugging TensorFlows and gradient descent algorithms while David slept soundly in his expensive apartment. Alex, David said, turning to me with that magnanimous smile he used when he wanted to look generous. Why don't you walk everyone through the technical implementation? The nuts and bolts behind the magic. The nuts and bolts behind the magic, as if I was the mechanic and he was the architect. As if I just assembled his brilliant design instead of creating everything from scratch while he learned enough buzzwords to fool investors. I stood up slowly. The room waited. David's smile stayed perfectly in place, but something flickered behind his eyes. A moment of uncertainty. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I think there's something more important we need to discuss. David's smile faltered. What do you mean? I got an interesting call last night. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. From Marcus Chen at Nexus Ventures. The room went silent. Everyone knew that name. Nexus had funded 3 unicorns in the past 2 years. Marcus Chen was venture capital royalty. David's face went pale. What kind of call? He wanted to discuss a $10 million investment. I let that sink in. But here's the interesting part. He wasn't calling to talk to you, David. He was calling to talk to me. The silence in the room felt heavy, oppressive. Jake looked confused. Lisa glanced between David and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Tom stared at the table. That doesn't make sense, David said, but his voice cracked slightly. All our investor relations go through me. I'm the CEO. I'm the public face of the company. You're right, I said. You are the public face. But Marcus Chen didn't want to talk to the face. He wanted to talk to the brain. David's hands clenched into fists. Alex, whatever game you think you're playing. It's not a game. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room display. Marcus did his homework. Real homework. Not the glossy press releases and TechCrunch articles. He dug into the actual technology. The screen filled with code. My code. Timestamps showing when it was written, who wrote it, every commit tracked and verified. He traced every patent application back to me. I continued. Every research paper I published before you convinced me to join your startup. Every algorithm that makes our AI special. David's mouth opened and closed like he was drowning. You're part of the team. Your work is company work. I built this company. I brought in the funding. You built the company on a foundation I created. I cut him off. And you've been taking credit for that foundation ever since. The code on the screen told the story. Thousands of commits all traced back to my username. The initial neural network architecture dated 6 months before David even came up with the idea for our startup. The breakthrough optimization algorithm that had caught Nexus's attention, written during a weekend when David was at a conference in Silicon Valley, probably telling investors about his revolutionary vision. This is insane, David said, but his voice was getting smaller. You can't do this. Do what? Tell the truth? Jake's hero worship was cracking. Lisa looked like someone had just explained a magic trick to her. Tom's silence spoke volumes. My phone buzzed. A text message that I had been waiting for. Marcus wants to schedule a follow-up call, I said, reading from my screen. He's prepared to offer $10 million for a 40% stake in my technology portfolio. Your technology portfolio? David's voice was barely a whisper. The patents are in my name, David. The research papers are published under my credentials. The code is committed under my username with timestamps that prove creation. Marcus isn't interested in licensing our current work. He wants to acquire the foundation and build something bigger. The room felt like it was spinning. David grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. He's also interested in hiring me directly, I continued. Lead AI architect for Nexus's new machine learning division. Starting salary, that's more than our entire company is worth. David's face went from pale to gray. You can't leave. You signed a non-compete. You signed intellectual property agreements. I smiled for the first time in months. I signed agreements that assign my future work to the company, but the foundational technology predates our partnership by 6 months. Marcus's lawyers have already reviewed everything. The silence stretched until it felt suffocating. David's empire, built on stolen credit, was crumbling in real time. There's more, I said, pulling up another screen. Marcus connected me with 3 other venture firms who have been trying to track down the actual creator of our breakthrough. Turns out, when you're vague about technical details in investor meetings, smart people start asking questions. David had been selling my work for so long that he probably believed his own lies. But venture capitalists didn't get to the top by accepting surface-level explanations. They dug deeper. They verified. They found the truth. Sequoia called me yesterday afternoon, I continued. Andreessen Horowitz the day before. They've all been having the same conversations with their technical advisors. Who actually wrote this code? Where did this breakthrough come from? Why can't the supposed founder explain the mathematical foundations of his own algorithms? David slumped into his chair. The confident CEO persona was gone, replaced by something smaller and desperate. Alex, he said, and for the first time in 3 years, he sounded like the nervous computer science graduate I had met at a tech meetup instead of the polished entrepreneur he had become. We can work this out. We're brothers. We built this together. Brothers. The word hit me like a physical blow. We weren't actually brothers, not by blood, but we had been close enough that the word meant something once. David had been my best friend in college, my roommate. The guy who convinced me to drop out and chase the startup dream instead of finishing my PhD. I had trusted him, completely. When he said we would be equal partners, I believed him. When he said he just needed to be the front man to attract investors while I focused on the technical work, I agreed. When he gradually started taking more credit, speaking as if the breakthroughs were his ideas implemented by his technical team, I stayed quiet because I thought what mattered was the work itself. But somewhere along the way, David started believing his own performance. He began to see me as an employee instead of a partner, a very talented employee, but still just someone who worked for him. The breaking point had come 3 months ago. TechCrunch wanted to do a feature story on our AI breakthrough. David had done the entire interview without mentioning my name once. When the article came out with the headline, "Young CEO Revolutionizes Machine Learning with Breakthrough Algorithm," I finally understood what I had become in David's mind. I was the ghost in his machine. "We can work this out," David repeated, his voice getting desperate. "Whatever Marcus is offering, we can match it. More equity, a technical co-founder title, your name on the patents." "My name is already on the patents, David. The ones that matter." I closed my laptop. "The ones you can't touch because they predate our partnership." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. Jake looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. Lisa was staring at her laptop screen, probably going through our code repository with new eyes. Tom was nodding slowly, like pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. "The vote was unanimous," Tom said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He had been silent through the entire confrontation, but his words carried weight. Tom was our most senior engineer, hired 6 months after the company started. He had worked with both me and David long enough to know the truth. "What vote?" David asked. "The technical advisory board at Nexus," Tom said. "Marcus asked me to consult on the due diligence. I gave him my honest assessment." David's face went white. "You've been talking to Marcus Chen?" "He reached out to 3 former colleagues who had worked with both of you," Tom said. "Professional references, technical assessments. He wanted to understand the real development history before making an offer." The betrayal on David's face was almost comical. He was learning what it felt like to be undermined by someone he trusted, someone who had been quietly working behind the scenes while he remained oblivious. "I told them the truth," Tom continued, "that Alex wrote every line of the core algorithms. That the breakthrough everyone's excited about came from his research, his late nights, his technical vision. That you're a talented business leader who built an impressive company, but you're not the technical genius you've been claiming to be." David looked around the room desperately. "This is insane. You can't just steal my company." "I'm not stealing anything," I said. "I'm taking what was always mine." My phone rang. Marcus Chen. I answered it on speaker. "Alex," Marcus's voice filled the room. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I'd like to accelerate our timeline. Can you be in Palo Alto tomorrow for a formal presentation to our partners?" "Of course," I said, keeping my eyes on David's face. "Excellent. We're prepared to offer $12 million for a 35% stake, with an additional $5 million in development funding and a guarantee that you'll retain technical control and final decision authority over all AI-related products." The number hit the room like a physical force. 12 million. For my work, my vision, my sleepless nights, and breakthrough moments that David had been claiming as his own. "Send me the details," I said. "I'll review everything tonight." "Perfect. Oh, and Alex, my technical team is very excited about your natural language processing approach. The efficiency gains you achieved are remarkable. We think there are applications we haven't even imagined yet." My natural language processing approach. The one I had developed during a 3-week marathon coding session while David was on a business development trip to New York, probably telling potential clients about his revolutionary AI vision. "I'm excited to explore those possibilities," I said. "One more thing," Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We might have opportunities for additional technical talent from your current team. If you know any engineers who contributed significantly to the development, we'd be happy to interview them." Tom straightened in his chair. Lisa's eyes lit up. Jake looked confused but intrigued. "I'll put together a list," I said, looking directly at David. "Excellent. See you tomorrow, Alex." The call ended. The room stayed silent. David's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was being systematically dismantled by the very people he thought he controlled. "You can't do this," he whispered. "It's already done," I said. "The only question now is whether you want to make this easy or hard." David's hands were shaking. "What does that mean?" "Nexus wants to acquire the core technology and the team behind it. They're prepared to make an offer for the entire company, but only if I'm attached as technical lead with full authority over product development." I pulled up the preliminary term sheet on my laptop. The numbers were larger than anything David had ever secured. 18 million for full company acquisition, I read, with retention bonuses for key technical personnel, Employment contracts for the leadership team. David's breathing was getting shallow. Leadership team? Marcus was very specific about the structure he wants. I scrolled down the document. Technical founder and CTO with product authority. That would be me. Senior engineering team leads. Marketing and business development roles for qualified candidates. I looked at David directly. No CEO position. They want to bring in their own management team. The words landed like physical blows. Everything David had built, every investor meeting where he played the visionary founder, every conference panel where he shared his startup wisdom, all of it was being erased. They're essentially buying my technology and hiring me to run it, I continued. Everyone else would be evaluated for fit within their existing structure. David stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward into the wall. This is revenge, pure revenge. No, I said, my voice calm and steady. This is business. This is what happens when investors discover that the technical founder they wanted to back was never actually in charge of the technology. The truth hung in the air between us. David had spent 3 years building a house of cards, taking credit that wasn't his, making promises based on work he didn't understand. Now the wind was blowing, and everything was coming down. I made you, David said, his voice rising. I gave you this opportunity. I built this company around your work. You built this company on top of my work, I corrected. And you convinced yourself that made you the creator instead of just the salesman. The difference mattered. It mattered more than all the investor meetings and conference presentations and TechCrunch articles combined. I have a lawyer, David said desperately. I have contracts. I have intellectual property assignments. Your lawyers can talk to Nexus's lawyers, I said, but the foundational patents are mine. The research is published under my name. The code repository has 3 years of commits proving who actually wrote what. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. With a black marker, I drew a simple timeline. January 2020, I wrote. Initial neural network architecture developed and patented by Alex Rivera. David watched in silence as I continued. April 2020, first breakthrough in optimization algorithms. Research published in Journal of Machine Learning Research. Author, Alex Rivera. More dates, more breakthroughs, all documented, all timestamped, all credited to me. August 2020. David Rivera approaches Alex about starting a company to commercialize the technology. I turned to face the room. Everything that makes this company valuable was created before David and I ever shook hands on a partnership. The timeline made it clear. David hadn't stolen completed work. That would have been simple theft. He had done something more insidious. He had taken credit for ongoing innovation, positioning himself as the source of breakthroughs that came from my mind and my hands. It was a slow-motion theft that happened in conference rooms and investor pitches, in media interviews and startup competitions. Death by 1,000 small lies until the truth got buried so deep that even David seemed to believe his own version of events. Marcus Chen figured this out in 2 weeks of due diligence, I said. How long do you think it would take other investors to connect the same dots? David's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, a cascade of notifications. He looked at the screen and his face went ashen. What? Lisa asked. TechCrunch, David said, his voice barely audible. Someone leaked the Nexus story. My phone lit up with notifications too. The startup world moved fast when money and drama intersected. I opened the article and read the headline out loud. Nexus Ventures offers $12M to acquire AI startup founded on misattributed technology. The article was brutal in its clarity. Marcus Chen had given an on-the-record interview explaining exactly why Nexus was interested in me specifically rather than the company David had built. Technical analysis of patent filings, verification of research publications, a clear timeline showing where the breakthrough technology actually originated. They interviewed the journal editors who peer-reviewed my research papers, I read. They talked to my PhD advisor at MIT. They verified every technical claim with independent experts. David slumped back into his chair. This destroys everything. This destroys the lie, I corrected. The truth was always going to come out eventually. Marcus Chen just expedited the process. My phone rang again. Unknown number with a 650 area code. Alex Rivera? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Jennifer Park from TechCrunch. I'm following up on the Nexus story. Do you have a few minutes to comment? I looked at David. 3 years of silence. 3 years of letting him speak for both of us while I stayed in the background. I have time, I said. Jennifer's questions were sharp and informed. She had done her homework, verifying the technical details before reaching out. The questions she asked made it clear that the story was bigger than just a venture capital deal. In your opinion, Jennifer said, how common is this kind of misattribution in startup founding teams? I thought about that. How many other brilliant engineers were sitting in conference rooms right now, watching less technical partners take credit for their breakthroughs? How many had signed equity agreements that seemed fair until they realized their contribution was being systematically undervalued and misrepresented? More common than it should be, I said. The startup world rewards charismatic storytellers, not necessarily the people who do the hardest technical work. Sometimes those are the same person, sometimes they're not. What advice would you give to other technical founders who might be in similar situations? David was watching me with something that looked like fear. He knew what I was going to say before I said it. Document everything. Patent your breakthroughs under your own name. Publish your research independently. Don't let anyone else become the sole public face of your technical achievements. The interview lasted 20 minutes. When I hung up, the room was silent again. The article goes live tomorrow morning, I said. David's phone started ringing. Investors, probably, board members, people who had bought into his version of our story and were suddenly realizing they might have been backing the wrong horse. He didn't answer. I need you to understand something, I said to David, my voice softer now. This isn't personal anymore. It stopped being personal the moment you decided that I was invisible. David looked up at me. For a moment, he looked like the friend I used to know, uncertain, vulnerable, human. I never meant for it to happen this way, he said. But you didn't stop it from happening, I replied. When investors started calling you a technical genius, you didn't correct them. When articles credited you with breakthrough algorithms, you didn't mention my name. When conference organizers asked you to speak about AI innovation, you didn't suggest they invite the person who actually created the innovations. Each example was a small betrayal. Individually, they seemed minor. Collectively, they had erased me from the story of my own work. I thought we were a team, David said. We were, until you decided that teams don't share credit equally. My laptop chimed with an email from Marcus Chen, the formal term sheet updated with even better terms than he had mentioned on the call. $15 million, I read, for full technology acquisition and exclusive employment agreement. David's phone was still ringing. He finally answered. David Rivera, he said, his voice hollow. I could hear shouting from the other end of the line, an investor, angry and confused, demanding explanations for the TechCrunch article that apparently wasn't waiting until tomorrow morning to publish. David held the phone away from his ear. The voice was loud enough for everyone in the conference room to hear. Did you or did you not develop the core algorithms? Because I've got Marcus Chen telling reporters that our due diligence was fundamentally flawed, and I've got a board meeting in 2 hours where I need to explain why we backed a founder who wasn't actually the founder. David looked at me desperately. One last appeal to the friendship we used to have. I shook my head slowly. I'll have to call you back, David told the investor, and hung up. The room felt heavy with the weight of collapsed dreams and exposed lies. What happens now? Jake asked quietly. Now, I closed my laptop and stood up. Now everyone gets to decide what they want to be part of. I looked around the room at the team David had built around my technology. Good engineers who had believed in a vision that was never quite what it seemed. Nexus is hiring, I said. They want the technical team that built this breakthrough. They're offering competitive salaries, equity in a much larger fund, and the chance to work on problems that matter. Tom nodded immediately. Lisa looked interested. Jake seemed torn between opportunity and loyalty to David. What about David? Jake asked. I looked at my former best friend, slumped in his chair, his empire crumbling around him. David's a talented business leader, I said, meaning it. He built an impressive company, raised significant funding, created a strong team culture. Those are real skills that any startup would value. David looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. But he's not a technical founder, I continued, and Nexus is acquiring technology, not business operations. The hope died. Marcus is flying up from Palo Alto tomorrow morning, I said. He wants to meet the full engineering team and make formal offers to anyone who's interested. I walked toward the conference room door, then stopped. David, I said, not turning around, you're not a bad person. You just convinced yourself that taking credit was the same thing as earning it. I left him there, surrounded by the team he had built on the foundation of my work, watching everything he thought he owned slip away. The next morning, I drove to the airport to pick up Marcus Chen. He was exactly what I expected. Sharp suit, sharper mind, the kind of confidence that came from making billion-dollar decisions and being right more often than wrong. We talked in my car during the drive to our office. He wanted to understand not just the technology, but the story behind it, the human elements that due diligence couldn't capture. Founding team dynamics are crucial, he said. We've seen brilliant technology fail because the people behind it couldn't work together effectively. I told him about David and me, the friendship, the partnership, the gradual erosion of trust and respect. Marcus listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions that showed he understood both the technical and emotional complexities. It's more common than you think, he said finally. Talented engineers who partner with business-focused co-founders and slowly get written out of their own story. We've seen it dozens of times. The office looked different when we walked in, quieter, more tense. David's car wasn't in the parking lot. Tom met us at reception. His resignation letter was already written, sitting on David's empty desk. He didn't come in this morning, Tom said. Sent an email at 6 a.m. saying he was taking a personal day to consider the company's options. Marcus smiled grimly. That's usually when we know negotiations are going to be complicated. We spent the morning in the conference room where everything had unraveled the day before. Marcus interviewed each engineer individually, asking technical questions that went far deeper than any business leader could fake. By lunch, he had made offers to everyone except Jake, who was too junior for Nexus's immediate needs but got a referral to a partner firm that specialized in developing emerging talent. $18 million for the full acquisition. Marcus told me over sandwiches in David's office. Full technical authority for you, employment contracts for the core team, and a clean break from any complicated partnership arrangements. The number was staggering. More money than I had ever imagined when I was writing the first lines of code in my graduate school apartment. There's one condition, Marcus said. I waited. David has to agree to the sale and transfer any remaining intellectual property claims. He still owns 60% of the company equity, even if that equity is built on technology he didn't create. The irony was perfect. David's business success had given him legal control over the very assets that were only valuable because of work I had done before he was involved. What if he won't sell? I asked. Then we make you a direct offer for employment and licensing rights to the foundational technology, Marcus said. It's messier legally and worth less money to everyone involved, but it's still a path forward. David's choice: cooperate and everyone wins big, or fight and everyone wins smaller while lawyers get rich. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Can we talk? Just the two of us. I showed Marcus the message. He nodded. Take all the time you need, he said. This decision affects both of your futures. David was waiting in the parking lot when I came outside. He looked like he hadn't slept. I've been thinking all night, he said. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, neutral territory away from the office and the weight of everything that had happened there. I'm sorry, David said when we sat down. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I waited. I convinced myself that building the company was as important as creating the technology. He continued, that raising funding and managing teams and dealing with investors was just as valuable as writing code and solving technical problems. He was right, actually. Those were valuable skills. The problem wasn't that David had contributed to our success. The problem was that he had claimed my contributions as his own. I started believing my own story, David said. When investors called me a tech visionary, when articles described me as the brilliant founder behind breakthrough AI, I stopped correcting them. I liked the recognition. I liked being seen as the genius instead of just the business guy. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. I know the patents are yours, he said. I know the research is yours. I know you created everything that makes this company valuable. I sipped my coffee and waited for him to continue. I'll sign whatever Marcus needs. David said, full sale, clean transfer, no legal complications. You deserve this opportunity, and I deserve to face the consequences of taking credit I didn't earn. It was the conversation I had needed to hear for 3 years. Not an excuse or a rationalization, but an acknowledgement of what had actually happened. What will you do? I asked. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Start over. Find a technical co-founder who's actually technical. Be honest about what I bring to partnerships and what I don't. We sat in silence for a while, two friends whose relationship had been destroyed by ambition and misplaced credit, trying to find a way to end things with dignity instead of hatred. For what it's worth, I said finally, you did build an impressive company. You raised funding that I never could have raised alone. You created a team culture that attracted talented people. You turned my research into something commercially viable. David nodded slowly, but I'm not a technical founder. No, I agreed. You're not. We shook hands in the coffee shop parking lot, not as partners anymore, but not as enemies either, just as two people who had learned expensive lessons about credit and consequences. The acquisition closed 3 weeks later. $18 million for technology I had created in graduate school and refined through countless nights in startup offices. David signed every document without complaint and used his portion of the proceeds to enroll in an executive MBA program. Tom, Lisa, and I started at Nexus the following Monday. The offices in Palo Alto were everything our scrappy startup hadn't been. Resources, support, access to problems that mattered on a global scale. Marcus introduced me to the technical advisory board as their new lead AI architect. No qualifiers, no shared credit, no asterisks, just recognition for work I had actually done. 6 months later, we launched a natural language processing platform that partners with hospital systems to improve patient communication. The efficiency gains were remarkable, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The first customer called it revolutionary. The press called it a breakthrough in medical AI. This time, they spelled my name right.